The morning light stretched across Camp Pendleton's shooting range as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rivera observed the new group preparing for weapons tests. After spending over 2 decades with the Navy SEALs, he developed an instinct for recognizing talent. Yet nothing could have readied him for what was about to unfold. A woman, probably around 25, stood among the Marines. Her reddish-brown hair was tied back according to regulations, and her green eyes showed a fierce concentration that immediately drew his notice. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen moved with the smooth confidence of someone who dedicated countless hours to mastering her skills. There was something more, though, a calmness that reminded Marcus of the finest snipers he'd encountered. The massive Barrett .50 caliber rifle rested in front of her. Most people approached this weapon with obvious caution, sometimes even fear. The Barrett wasn't just another gun. It was designed to stop vehicles and blast through concrete barriers from seemingly impossible distances. Its kickback alone had bruised many unprepared shooters and left them shaken. Sarah's approach was completely different. She circled the weapon slowly, inspecting each part with the careful focus of a surgeon before a critical procedure. Her fingers ran along the barrel, verified the scope attachments, and tested the support legs with light pressure. When she finally positioned herself behind the rifle, the two seemed to merge into one. Marcus had watched hundreds of Marines fire the Barrett for the first time. Most jerked back in anticipation, some completely missed their mark. A handful needed medical help after experiencing the weapon's brutal recoil. But as Sarah got into position, Marcus noticed something extraordinary. She appeared totally calm, her breathing even and measured. The target sat 800 meters away, a typical qualification distance, yet difficult enough to separate the truly skilled from the average shooter. Sarah made tiny adjustments to the scope, every movement precise and deliberate. She loaded a round with the fluid motion of someone who'd done this ritual countless times. The first shot thundered across the range. Through his field glasses, Marcus saw the target paper shake as the huge bullet punched straight through the center. Impressive, though not unheard of. What caught his eye was her response. No excitement, no visible pride, just the automatic process of loading another round. The second shot came within 30 seconds. Another perfect center strike, then a third. By the fourth round, other instructors had stopped their work to watch. By the sixth round, a small group had formed behind Sarah, everyone staring in wonder at the increasingly destroyed center of the far target. Sarah fired 15 rounds total, 15 shots so consistent they could have been fired by a machine. When she finally put the rifle down and stood up, polite clapping came from the gathered Marines and instructors, but Sarah hardly acknowledged it. She simply nodded toward the range supervisor and started cleaning the weapon with the same careful precision she'd shown while shooting. Marcus walked over as she worked. Up close, he could see the rough skin on her trigger finger, the small lines around her eyes from years of looking through scopes, and something else, a faraway expression he recognized in combat snipers who'd seen action. "Excellent shooting, Staff Sergeant," Marcus said, offering his hand. "Chief Rivera, Naval Special Warfare Development Group." Sarah glanced up from the rifle she was maintaining, her green eyes meeting his with a look that was both respectful and assured. "Thank you, Chief. Just following my training." Her voice had a subtle accent Marcus couldn't identify, but something in her tone suggested deeper experience beyond her years. He'd anticipated the typical response from a Marine showing off pride, enthusiasm, perhaps some bragging about natural ability. Instead, Sarah's reaction was almost casual, as though outstanding marksmanship was simply routine rather than remarkable. "Mind telling me where you picked up those skills?" Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. That level of accuracy doesn't come from standard training. Sarah kept cleaning the Barrett's components, her actions precise and methodical. "My grandfather taught me when I was 8, she said without looking up. "Started with a small caliber rifle, gradually worked up. He used to say shooting was 90% mental, 10% technique." "Your grandfather sounds like he knew what he was doing," Marcus responded. "Was he military?" For the first time, Sarah stopped cleaning. A brief shadow passed over her face, so quick Marcus nearly missed it. "Something like that," she said quietly, then went back to her work. Marcus had questioned enough people during his career to know when someone was being intentionally vague. Clearly, there was more to Sarah's background than she wanted to share with a stranger, regardless of his rank. But he'd also learned that the best operators often carried secrets, and pushing too hard too soon rarely worked. "Well, if you're interested in developing your abilities further, our development group always needs shooters with your talent," Marcus said, offering her his card. "We run specialized programs you might find interesting." Sarah accepted the card and looked at it briefly before tucking it away. I appreciate the offer, Chief, but I'm content where I am. As Marcus walked away, he found himself puzzled by the meeting. He'd met thousands of shooters throughout his career, from brand new recruits to experienced snipers with confirmed kills across multiple war zones. But something about Sarah Chen didn't match the usual pattern. Her shooting was too flawless, too controlled, too expert for someone who should have been learning rather than showing mastery. That evening, Marcus sat in his office, looking at Sarah's personnel file on his screen. What he discovered was disappointingly standard. A model Marine with outstanding fitness evaluations, a spotless record, and shooting scores that were good but not exceptional. Nothing in her official file suggested the level of ability he'd witnessed that morning. But Marcus had learned to notice what wasn't being said in military records. The unexplained breaks in Sarah's training history, the unclear references to special duties, and the fact that someone with her obvious talents hadn't been chosen for sniper school all suggested a story that wasn't told through official channels. He closed the file and leaned back, bothered by questions he couldn't answer. From his experience, shooters like Sarah didn't simply appear fully trained. That level of ability required years of practice, expert teaching, and most crucially, actual application under pressure. The question that would stay with him for days was straightforward. Where had Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen truly learned to shoot? And what wasn't she revealing about her past? 3 days following the shooting display, Marcus found himself unable to forget his curiosity about Sarah Chen. He'd investigated promising candidates before, but something about her performance troubled him in a way that felt different from simple professional interest. During his lunch period, he decided to do some unofficial digging. The Marine Corps personnel database held the usual information: birth details, enlistment records, training history, and duty station. Sarah had joined 4 years earlier at 21, finished basic training at Paris Island with honors, and served with various infantry units before her current post. Her marksmanship scores during training were good but not outstanding. Certainly nothing that would predict the performance Marcus had seen. What grabbed his attention were the gaps. Sarah had taken 3 long leaves during her service, each lasting several weeks and marked simply as personal emergency, with no further detail. For a young Marine without family issues listed in her file, multiple extended absences seemed odd. Marcus picked up his phone and called an old friend at Marine Corps Intelligence. Gunnery Sergeant Tom Walsh had been conducting background checks for 15 years and owed Marcus several favors from their joint missions in Afghanistan. Walsh speaking, came the familiar rough voice. "Tom, Marcus Rivera here. I need help. SEAL boy, what kind of trouble are you getting into now?" Marcus explained his interest in Sarah Chen, making sure to present it as standard screening for potential special operations recruitment. Walsh agreed to make some quiet inquiries and contact him within a few days. Meanwhile, Sarah carried on with her regular duties, apparently unaware of the attention her shooting had created. Marcus made sure to observe her during unit fitness training and saw the same controlled precision in her action. She ran with the mechanical efficiency of someone used to covering long distances, her breathing steady even during the toughest exercises. During combat training scenarios, she showed tactical awareness that seemed advanced for her official experience level. But it was during a standard training exercise that Marcus saw something that deepened his suspicions. The Marines were practicing close-quarters combat when one of the instructors decided to increase difficulty by adding a hostage situation. A volunteer played a captive held by an armed instructor, with the challenge being to eliminate the threat without harming the innocent person. Most Marines tackled the scenario using standard techniques they'd been taught, methodical, by-the-book procedures that emphasized safety over speed. Sarah's approach was notably different. She moved through the scenario with fluid confidence, suggesting muscle memory rather than conscious thinking. Her weapon handling was perfect, her decision-making instant, and her shot placement accurate enough to split the narrow space between hostage and captor with millimeters to spare. "Good Lord," muttered the instructor as he checked the target. "Chen, where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah's answer was the same evasive deflection she'd given Marcus. "Just lots of practice, Sergeant." But Marcus noticed something the instructor missed. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she holstered her weapon, and her eyes held a distant expression he recognized from combat veterans who'd seen real action. It was the look of someone remembering things they'd prefer to forget. 2 days later, Walsh called back with information that made Marcus straighten in his chair. "Your Marine is fascinating, Marcus." Walsh started without introduction. "Officially, everything checks out. Unofficially, there are some oddities, like those extended leaves she took. They don't match any family emergencies or personal problems in her record. And here's the interesting part. During her second leave, Customs shows her entering Canada, but there's no matching exit record for over a month. Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. Canada? It gets more interesting. I know someone in Canadian immigration who owes me. Turns out your Sarah Chen has been crossing the border regularly since 16. Always the same destination. A small town in Alberta called High Prairie. What's in High Prairie? Not much. Ranch country. Population around 3,000. But here's what's fascinating. It's also where one of the most exclusive private military training facilities in North America operates. Place called Northern Tactical Solutions. Marcus had heard whispers about Northern Tactical Solutions during his years in special operations. It was supposedly where wealthy clients, private military contractors, and certain government agencies sent people for training too sensitive or specialized for official military programs. The type of place that didn't advertise and didn't maintain public records. You think she trained there? I think she was doing something there, Walsh responded. But here's where it gets really fascinating. I contacted someone who works security contracting in the Middle East. He mentioned there's been talk in the community about a sniper working the Afghanistan-Pakistan border region. Female, extremely skilled, taking contracts the regular military won't touch. Goes by the call sign Ghost. Marcus felt chills run down his spine. You think it's her? I think your Marine Staff Sergeant has been living two lives. The timing of her leaves matches exactly with some major operations this Ghost character was supposedly involved in. Operations requiring the kind of shooting skills you witnessed. After ending the call, Marcus sat in his office staring at Sarah's official photo. The young woman in the picture looked like any other Marine professional, capable, but ordinary. But Marcus now suspected he was looking at someone who'd been living two existences, maintaining the appearance of a regular service member, while secretly operating as one of the world's most skilled snipers. The ethical questions troubled him. If Sarah was indeed working as a private military contractor during her leaves, she was potentially breaking military regulations and possibly federal law. But the tactical possibilities excited him. If even half of what Walsh had suggested was accurate, Sarah possessed abilities that would be invaluable to special operations forces. Marcus decided he needed to confront her directly, but if Sarah was indeed the sniper known as Ghost, she would be extremely dangerous if she felt threatened or exposed. He would need to approach her in a way showing he could be trusted with her secret, while making clear he knew more than she might be comfortable with. That afternoon, Marcus found Sarah in the armory carefully cleaning weapons after the day's training. The methodical way she took apart and cleaned each component spoke of someone who understood weapon maintenance was literally life or death. Staff Sergeant Chen, Marcus said quietly, making sure they were alone. I'd like to speak with you privately. Sarah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, and Marcus saw a flash of weariness in her green eyes before her expression became neutral. Of course, Chief. What can I do for you? I've been researching since we talked the other day, Marcus began carefully. Your shooting abilities are exceptional, the kind that usually comes from specialized training and actual field experience. Sarah kept cleaning the weapon, but Marcus noticed her movements had become more controlled, more deliberate. I told you, Chief, my grandfather was a good teacher.
I'm sure he was, but I'm curious about your trips to Canada. Specifically to Alberta. Sarah's hands stopped moving completely. For several seconds, the armory was entirely silent except for the distant sounds of Marines training outside. When Sarah finally looked up, her eyes held a hardness that hadn't been there before. I think we need to have a longer talk, Chief, she said quietly. But not here. That evening, Marcus and Sarah met at a quiet bar 20 miles from base. The kind of place where military personnel could talk freely without worrying about being overheard by colleagues or superiors. Sarah had changed from her uniform into civilian clothes, jeans and a simple sweater that made her look even younger than 25. But her eyes held an age that didn't match her appearance. They sat in a corner booth with beers that neither was really drinking. Marcus waited for Sarah to speak first, understanding she needed to control how much of her story she'd reveal. How much do you know? Sarah asked finally, her voice barely audible. Enough to know Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen isn't the complete story. Marcus responded, I know about Northern Tactical Solutions. I know about the contracts in Afghanistan. And I know about Ghost. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, and Marcus saw her shoulders drop slightly, as if releasing a weight she'd been carrying for years. When she opened her eyes again, there was a mixture of relief and resignation in her expression. My grandfather wasn't just some hunting enthusiast, Sarah began. He was Sergeant Major James Chen, Chinese-Canadian Special Forces, served in Korea, Vietnam as a military advisor, and half a dozen other conflicts that never made the history books. When my parents died in a car crash when I was 8, he took me. Marcus nodded, understanding this was likely the first time Sarah had told this story to anyone in her military career. Grandpa Jim didn't know how to raise a little girl the normal way. What he knew was military training, discipline, and marksmanship. By 12, I could outshoot most adults. By 16, I was competing in precision rifle competitions across North America. That's how you found Northern Tactical Solutions. Sarah took a sip of her beer, gathering her thoughts. One of the instructors at a competition noticed my abilities and approached me. He said there were opportunities for someone with my talents, but they required specialized training not available through normal channels. The pay would be excellent, and I could help serve my country in ways regular military service couldn't provide. So you started training there while still in high school, summers and weekends, advanced marksmanship, surveillance, infiltration techniques, languages. The instructors were former military from dozens of countries, CLs, CS, Spetsnaz, Moss. I learned things most special forces operators never see. Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of Sarah's deception, and when you joined the Marines, it was part of the plan. Northern Tactical needed operators with legitimate military credentials who could take extended leaves without raising suspicions. The Marine Corps was perfect cover. I could maintain my official military career while taking contracts on the side. The contracts in Afghanistan, Marcus pressed gently. Sarah's expression darkened and she stared into her beer for several moments before continuing. High-value targets regular military couldn't touch due to political considerations. War criminals hiding in neutral territory. Terrorist leaders operating from locations where official military action would create diplomatic incidents. The 3,247-meter shot, Marcus said quietly. That wasn't just a rumor, was it? Sarah looked up sharply, surprise replacing the weariness in her eye. How could you possibly know about that? That operation was completely classified. Word travels in the special operations community, even when it shouldn't. A shot like that becomes legend. Sarah was quiet so long Marcus began wondering if she'd continue. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of memories she wished she could forget. It was my third contract in Afghanistan. A Taliban commander named Hassad Mahmud, who was coordinating attacks on civilian targets from a compound in the mountains near the Pakistani border. Intelligence showed he was planning something major, possibly a chemical weapons attack on a refugee camp. Marcus leaned forward slightly, understanding he was about to hear details of an operation that officially never occurred. The compound was in a location where conventional military action was impossible, too close to the Pakistani border, too many civilians nearby, and too politically sensitive for official involvement. But Mahmud had to be stopped. Sarah's hands were steady as she continued, but Marcus noticed she wasn't making eye contact anymore, as if seeing something beyond the bar around them. I spent 6 days moving into position. The shot had to be taken from a ridge across a valley to avoid civilian casualties and provide a clear escape route. The distance was extreme, over 3 kilometers, and the environmental conditions were challenging. High altitude, shifting winds, temperature changes throughout the day. 3,247 meters, Marcus said. That's nearly 2 miles, 2.01 miles exactly. I had to account for the Earth's rotation at that distance. The bullet flight time was over 4 seconds. Mahmud moved from his usual position 3 times before I had the shot I needed. Marcus tried to imagine the level of skill and patience such a shot required. Most military snipers considered anything over 1,000 meters extremely long range. Sarah was describing something that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. When I took the shot, I wasn't even certain I could see the target clearly enough through the scope. The heat distortion and atmospheric conditions made positive identification difficult, but intelligence confirmed Mahmud was scheduled to be in that exact location at that exact time. And you hit him, Sarah nodded slowly. 1 shot, clean. The operation succeeded, but the psychological impact was significant. Taking a life from that distance under those conditions in service of a cause I could never officially acknowledge, it changes you. Marcus understood the weight she carried. He'd seen the same burden in other operators who'd been required to make life-and-death decisions in the shadows, without recognition or official support. That's why you want to stay in the regular Marines, Marcus said. Understanding, you're tired of the black operation. I'm tired of being a ghost, Sarah replied, using her call sign for the first time in their conversation. I want to serve my country in the light, not the shadows. I want to train other Marines, pass on my skills in an official capacity. I want my service to mean something I can talk about when I'm old. Marcus sat back, processing everything Sarah had told him. Her story explained not just her exceptional marksmanship abilities, but also her maturity, her tactical awareness, and the shadows he'd seen in her eyes. She was a combat veteran with kills in multiple war zones, disguised as a regular Marine with no combat experience. The question now, Marcus said carefully, is what happens next. You've told me things that could end your military career if they became official knowledge. Sarah met his eyes directly for the first time since starting her story. I told you because I trust you and because I think you understand what it means to serve in the shadows. But I'm done with that life, Chief. I want to be Sarah Chen, Marine instructor, not Ghost the contract sniper. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the trust she'd placed in him and the responsibility that came with her confession. I respect that choice, but your abilities are too valuable to waste on routine instruction. There might be other ways to serve that don't require you to disappear into the shadows. 3 weeks after their conversation at the bar, Marcus found himself in a secure conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado. Across the table sat Admiral Patricia Hayes, a woman whose career in naval intelligence had earned her a reputation for handling the most sensitive operations with surgical precision. Between them lay a classified file folder containing everything Marcus had learned about Sarah Chen. This is quite a story, Chief Rivera, Admiral Hayes said, closing the file. A Marine staff sergeant who's been moonlighting as one of the world's most effective snipers. Under normal circumstances, this would be a court-martial offense ending her career and possibly resulting in federal charge. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. With respect, Admiral, Staff Sergeant Chen has served with distinction in both her official and unofficial roles. Her actions in Afghanistan prevented civilian casualties that could have numbered in the thousands. Admiral Hayes studied Marcus with the calculating gaze that had made her legendary in intelligence circles. I'm not questioning her effectiveness, Chief. I'm questioning the precedent this sets. We can't have service members taking unauthorized contracts, regardless of how noble their intention. But we can have service members whose unique abilities serve the broader interests of national security. Marcus countered. Chen wants to end her contract work and serve officially. This could be an opportunity rather than a problem. The Admiral leaned back, considering his words. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus had spent days thinking about this moment, weighing potential benefits against obvious risks. I'm proposing we bring her into the fold officially, use her abilities to train our snipers, develop new long-range precision techniques, and serve as a consultant for operations requiring her level of expertise. And in exchange, we grant her immunity for her past unauthorized activities and give her the official recognition she's earned. She becomes an asset rather than a liability. Admiral Hayes was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the Pacific Ocean. Finally, she turned back to Marcus with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. There's something else, isn't there, Chief? You didn't request this meeting just to protect a Marine from court-martial. Marcus had known this moment would come, when he'd have to reveal the real reason he was advocating for her. There's intelligence suggesting several high-value terrorist targets have relocated to areas where conventional military action is politically unfeasible. Targets that pose imminent threats to American interests, but operate from locations where official military intervention would create diplomatic crises. And you believe Staff Sergeant Chen could neutralize these targets? I believe Staff Sergeant Chen could train a team of snipers to neutralize these targets, while maintaining plausible deniability for the United States government. Official enough to ensure proper oversight and support, but specialized enough to handle situations regular military units can't touch. Admiral Hayes opened the file again and studied a photograph of Sarah in her Marine uniform. This young woman has killed at least 17 people in unauthorized operations across 3 countries. She's violated numerous military regulations and potentially several international laws. And you want me to not only overlook this, but actually promote her to a position of greater responsibility. Marcus met her gaze steadily. I want you to recognize that Staff Sergeant Chen represents a unique asset that could serve American interests far better inside official channels than outside them. She's proven her loyalty, her effectiveness, and her desire to serve legitimate. The question is whether we're smart enough to utilize her properly. The Admiral closed the file and stood up, indicating the meeting was over. I'll need to discuss this with people who have much higher ranks than both of ours, Chief. In the meantime, Staff Sergeant Chen continues her regular duties and makes no contact with Northern Tactical Solutions or any other private military organizations. Is that understood? Perfectly understood, Admiral. Marcus left the meeting uncertain about Sarah's future, but hopeful that military leadership would recognize the opportunity her unique situation presented. He'd done everything possible to protect her, while serving the broader interests of national security. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her duties at Camp Pendleton, apparently unaware of the high-level discussions taking place about her future. She'd settled into a routine of weapons instruction that allowed her to share her expertise with younger Marines without revealing the true extent of her experience. During one particularly challenging training session, a young private named Rodriguez was struggling with long-range marksmanship fundamentals. Sarah had spent extra time with him after official training had ended, patiently explaining the physics of long-distance shooting. "I don't understand how you make it look so easy, Staff Sergeant," Rodriguez said in frustration. "I can barely hit the target at 500 meters, and you make shots at 800 look routine." Sarah smiled, remembering her own frustration when learning these same skills. "It's not about making it look easy, Rodriguez. It's about understanding that every shot results from dozens of small decisions made correctly. Breathing, trigger control, reading wind conditions, understanding your equipment, they all have to work together. But how do you know when all those things are working together?" Sarah paused, realizing she was about to share wisdom that had cost her years of dangerous training and life-or-death experience. "You know because you stop thinking about them individually. When you're properly trained, all those elements become automatic, and you can focus on the one thing that really matters, putting the bullet exactly where it needs to go." Private Rodriguez nodded, but Sarah could see he didn't fully understand yet. Understanding came with experience, and experience came with time and practice that hopefully wouldn't require him to learn in the deadly circumstances where she'd acquired her skills. 2 weeks later, Marcus received a call that would change everything. Admiral Hayes requested his immediate presence at Naval Special Warfare Headquarters for a meeting that would include representatives from several government agencies. She wasn't authorized to identify over an unsecured line. When Marcus arrived at the conference room, he found Admiral Hayes seated with 3 individuals in civilian clothes, whose bearing and attention immediately identified them as intelligence operatives. The atmosphere in the room was formal and slightly tense. "Chief Rivera," Admiral Hayes began without introduction, "I've discussed Staff Sergeant Chen's situation with the relevant authorities. There's been a unanimous decision that her abilities and experience represent a valuable national security asset that should be utilized rather than prosecuted." Marcus felt relief wash over him, but he remained cautious. "What exactly does that mean for Staff Sergeant Chen?" One of the civilians, a woman with graying hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "It means Staff Sergeant Chen will be offered a unique opportunity to serve her country in an official capacity that utilizes her specialized abilities while providing her the recognition and support she deserves. She'll be transferred to a new joint task force that handles precision operations in politically sensitive areas." Another civilian added, "Official status, full benefits, legal protection, and the opportunity to train the next generation of elite snipers." Marcus understood he was being told about the creation of something unprecedented, an official military unit designed to handle the kind of operations Sarah had been conducting as a private contractor. "And if she accepts," Admiral Hayes answered this time, "if she accepts, her previous unauthorized activities will be reclassified as preparatory training for her current assignment. Officially, Staff Sergeant Chen will become the founding member of the most elite sniper unit in American military history." Marcus smiled, understanding that Sarah's desire to serve in the light rather than the shadows was about to be granted in ways she'd never imagined possible. Marcus found Sarah in the same armory where he'd first confronted her about her secret life, carefully maintaining weapons, with the same attention to detail that had initially caught his notice.
This time, however, he approached with news that would fundamentally change her military career. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Marcus said quietly, ensuring they were alone, "we need to talk." Sarah looked up from the rifle she was cleaning, and Marcus saw the same weariness that had appeared during their first private conversation. "Is this about my situation, Chief?" "It is, and I have news I think you'll want to hear." Marcus quickly briefed Sarah on the meetings at Naval Special Warfare Command, the creation of the new Joint Task Force, and the official recognition of her abilities being offered. As he spoke, he watched Sarah's expression change from weariness to surprise to something that looked almost like hope. "They want to make my contract work official?" Sarah asked when Marcus had finished explaining. "More than that. They want to make you the founding member of an elite sniper unit
that will handle the most sensitive precision operations in American military history. You'll have full legal protection, official status, and the opportunity to train others in abilities that could save countless lives. Sarah set down the rifle and leaned against the workbench, processing the implications of what Marcus was telling her. What about the Marines? I've built relationships here, established myself as an instructor. You'll retain your Marine commission, but you'll be assigned to the Joint Task Force. Think of it as the ultimate instructor position. Instead of training regular Marines in basic marksmanship, you'll be developing the next generation of elite snipers. For several minutes, Sarah was quiet, staring at her hands as she considered the offer. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out in her expression, the desire for official recognition conflicting with the comfort of anonymity she'd found in her regular Marine duties. There would be conditions, Sarah said finally. I won't take assignments that involve assassination for political purposes. I won't eliminate anyone unless they pose an immediate threat to civilian lives or American national security. Marcus nodded, understanding her moral boundary. The task force would operate under strict rules of engagement. Every operation would require high-level approval and clear justification. You'd have input into mission selection and the right to refuse assignments that conflict with your principles. And the team I'd be training? Hand-picked volunteers from all branches of the military. The best shooters, but more importantly, people with the psychological profile to handle the kind of precision operations you've been conducting. People who can live with the weight of making life and death decisions from extreme distance. Sarah smiled slightly, and Marcus realized it was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. People like me, you mean? People who understand that sometimes saving lives requires taking them exactly like you. 2 months later, Sarah found herself at a classified training facility in the mountains of Colorado, surrounded by 12 of the most skilled snipers from across the American military. The men and women selected for the Joint Task Force represented years of combined combat experience. But none of them had attempted the kind of extreme long-range precision shooting Sarah had mastered. The training facility was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, even at Northern Tactical Solutions. Every piece of equipment was cutting-edge, from the custom-built rifles to the environmental monitoring systems that could track wind patterns and atmospheric conditions across distances of several miles. Sarah's first challenge was establishing credibility with operators who had their own impressive service records. Staff Sergeant Mike Collins, an Army Ranger sniper with 3 combat tours, was particularly skeptical. No disrespect, ma'am, but I've been shooting for 15 years and I've never heard of anyone making consistent shots beyond 2,000 meters. Collins said during their first team meeting. Sarah understood his skepticism. She'd encountered it throughout her career from male snipers who assumed a young woman couldn't possess the abilities she claimed. Rather than argue, she simply invited the team to accompany her to the long-range shooting facility. The target Sarah selected was positioned 2,800 meters from the firing line, nearly identical to the distance of her record shot in Afghanistan. Environmental conditions were challenging: gusty winds, varying temperatures, and mountain atmospheric conditions that created visual distortion at extreme ranges. Sarah approached the shooting position with the same methodical precision the team had observed during their initial briefing. She spent 15 minutes studying environmental conditions, consulting wind meters and atmospheric data, and making calculations that seemed far more complex than what any of them had been taught in sniper school. The rifle she selected was a custom-built 50 caliber precision instrument specifically designed for extreme long-range shooting. As Sarah settled behind the weapon, the team gathered around with binoculars and spotting scopes, curious to see whether her reputation was justified. The first shot thundered across the mountain valley with the distinctive boom of the heavy caliber rifle. Through their spotting scopes, the team watched as the target paper fluttered with impact. Nearly 4 seconds after the shot, the bullet had struck dead center, a feat that would have been impressive at half the distance. "Lucky shot," Collins muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah loaded a second round and fired again within 30 seconds. Another center hit, then a third. By the 5th shot, the target was so damaged it was difficult to distinguish individual bullet holes from the massive hole blown through the center. Collins lowered his spotting scope and stared at Sarah with a mixture of respect and amazement. "Good grief, ma'am. How is that even possible?" Sarah stood and began breaking down the rifle for cleaning, her movements as methodical as always. "It's possible because it has to be possible. There are situations where conventional military force can't reach the targets that need to be eliminated. When political considerations, geographic limitations, or civilian safety concerns prevent normal operations, extreme precision becomes the only option." Over the following weeks, Sarah began sharing techniques and knowledge that revolutionized how the team approached long-range shooting. She taught them to read environmental conditions with scientific precision, to understand the physics of bullet flight over extreme distances, and most importantly, to develop the mental discipline required for shots that left no room for error. The psychological training was as important as the technical instruction. Sarah worked with each team member to help them understand the unique burden of being responsible for life and death decisions made from distances where the target was barely visible through a scope. When you pull the trigger from 3 kilometers away, you have 4 seconds to wonder if you made the right decision. Sarah told them during one training session. 4 seconds to question your intelligence, your identification, your justification for taking a life. By the time the bullet impacts, it's too late to change your mind. Staff Sergeant Collins proved to be one of her most dedicated students. His initial skepticism had transformed into deep respect for Sarah's abilities, and he applied himself to mastering the advanced techniques she taught with the intensity that had made him successful in his previous assignment. "You're not just teaching us to shoot farther," Collins observed after successfully making his first shot beyond 2,000 meters. "You're teaching us to think differently about what's possible." Sarah nodded, understanding this was exactly the transformation she'd hoped to see. "The most important thing I can teach you is that the limits you think exist are often just limits in your own mind. With proper training, proper equipment, and proper preparation, you can extend your effective range far beyond what conventional wisdom says is possible." As the months passed, Sarah found herself settling into her new role with a satisfaction she hadn't experienced since childhood. For the first time in her adult life, she was able to use her abilities openly, share her knowledge freely, and serve her country without the psychological burden of operating in the shadows. The Joint Task Force began receiving its first operational assignments 6 months after formation. These were precisely the kind of missions Sarah had been conducting as a private contractor, high-value targets in politically sensitive locations where conventional military action was impossible. The first mission involved a terrorist leader operating from a compound in a mountainous region, where any military action would create significant diplomatic complications. Intelligence indicated the target was planning a chemical weapons attack on a civilian population center, but his location made arrest or conventional military strike impossible. Sarah found herself in the familiar position of studying satellite imagery, weather patterns, and topographical maps to plan a shot that would eliminate the threat, while minimizing political fallout. The difference this time was that she wasn't working alone. She had a team of highly trained specialists providing support, intelligence, and backup. The shot itself was remarkably similar to her record-breaking kill in Afghanistan. Extreme range, challenging environmental conditions. 2 years after the formation of the Joint Task Force, Sarah stood before a classroom of Marine instructors at Quantico, delivering a lecture on advanced marksmanship technique. The audience consisted of seasoned Marines who trained the next generation of military snipers, and Sarah's reputation had grown to legendary status within the precision shooting community. "The key to extreme long-range precision," Sarah explained, pointing to a diagram showing bullet trajectory over distances exceeding 3 kilometers, "is understanding that you're not just fighting gravity and wind resistance. At these distances, you're accounting for the rotation of the Earth itself." A hand went up in the audience. Staff Sergeant Chen, "There are rumors you've made confirmed kills at distances exceeding 3 kilometers. Can you comment on the longest shot you've ever attempted?" Sarah paused, considering how much of her story she could share in an official setting. Her past as the sniper known as Ghost was now part of her official military record, but certain operational details remained classified. "I can confirm our task force has successfully engaged targets at distances previously considered impossible," Sarah replied carefully. "The specific details of those operations remain classified, but I can tell you that with proper training, environmental analysis, and equipment, effective engagement ranges can be extended far beyond traditional limitations." After the lecture, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a secret life as a contract sniper to her current position as one of the most respected marksmanship instructors in the military. The transformation had been more profound than simply changing her official status. It had fundamentally altered how she viewed her own service and sacrifice. Marcus, who had been promoted to Master Chief and now served as the task force's senior enlisted advisor, joined her in her office after the lecture. "How does it feel to be training the trainers?" he asked. "Surreal, honestly," Sarah replied. 3 years ago, I was operating completely outside official channels, carrying out missions I could never acknowledge. Now I'm teaching Marine instructors techniques that will eventually be passed down to thousands of snipers throughout the military." Marcus nodded, understanding the magnitude of the change. "Your students don't just learn shooting techniques from you. They learn what it means to carry the responsibility of precision operations." This was accurate. Sarah had discovered that her most important contribution wasn't just technical knowledge, but the psychological framework for handling the unique pressures of extreme long-range precision shooting. She taught her students to understand the weight of their decisions, the importance of absolute certainty before taking a shot, and the mental discipline required to function effectively under extreme stress. One of her most successful students was Collins, who had evolved from skeptical critic to trusted colleague. He now served as Sarah's second-in-command and had become an instructor himself, sharing the techniques Sarah had taught him with new task force recruits. Collins made a 2,400-meter shot last week during the Syrian operation, Marcus reported. Target was a weapons coordinator who was organizing attacks on refugee camps. Clean kill, no civilian casualties, mission accomplished. Sarah felt deep satisfaction knowing her training had enabled Collins to save lives while serving his country in an official capacity. This was the legacy she'd hoped to build, skilled operators who could handle the most challenging precision missions while maintaining the moral and legal framework she'd sometimes lacked during her contract work. The Syrian operation Marcus mentioned represented the kind of mission that justified the task force's existence. Intelligence had identified a terrorist leader, coordinating attacks from a location where conventional military action would have resulted in significant civilian casualty. The target's elimination required a precision shot from extreme range, delivered by an operator with the abilities to guarantee success while minimizing collateral damage. Collins had spent 4 days moving into position, much as Sarah had done during her record-breaking shot in Afghanistan. But unlike Sarah's experience as a contract sniper, Collins had full intelligence support, legal authorization, and extraction planning that ensured his safety throughout the mission. The difference between what we do now and what I did as Ghost, Sarah explained to her students during a training session, is that now we operate within a framework of accountability, legal authority, and moral clarity. Every shot we take is authorized by people who understand the full implications of our actions. This distinction had become increasingly important to Sarah as she matured in her military career. The abilities remained the same, but the context had fundamentally changed. She no longer operated in moral gray areas or carried the psychological burden of actions that couldn't be officially acknowledged. 6 months later, Sarah received news that would provide the ultimate validation of her transformation from shadow operator to official military asset. She was being considered for promotion to gunnery sergeant, an assignment as the senior instructor for the Marine Corps' new extreme precision marksmanship program. The promotion would make her responsible for developing the curriculum that would train Marine snipers in techniques previously available only through private military contractors like Northern Tactical Solutions. Her unofficial training and contract experience would become the foundation for official military doctrine. "You've come full circle," Marcus observed when Sarah shared the news. From learning these abilities outside official channels to making them part of official military training, Sarah understood the significance of what was being offered. She would have the opportunity to institutionalize the knowledge and techniques she'd acquired through years of dangerous operation, ensuring future American snipers would have access to the most advanced training available without requiring them to operate in the moral gray areas where she'd learned her craft. The ceremony for her promotion took place at Marine Corps Base Quantico, with senior officers from all branches of the military in attendance. As Sarah stood at attention while the promotion orders were read, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young woman learning to shoot under her grandfather's guidance, through the secret training at Northern Tactical Solutions, the dangerous contracts as Ghost, and finally to official recognition as one of the military's most skilled precision shooting instructors. Every step had led to this moment of validation and acknowledgement. Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Chen, the commanding officer, announced, "Your exceptional service and unique expertise have contributed immeasurably to American national security. Your development of extreme precision marksmanship techniques has revolutionized our ability to conduct surgical operations in politically sensitive environments." As she shook hands with senior officers and accepted congratulations from colleagues, Sarah felt a deep sense of completion. She had successfully transitioned from the shadows into the light, maintaining her ability to serve while gaining the recognition and official status she'd always sought. Later that evening at the celebration dinner, Marcus raised a toast that captured the significance of Sarah's achievement. To Gunnery Sergeant Chen, who proved that exceptional abilities developed in unconventional ways can serve conventional military purposes when applied with proper oversight and moral clarity. Sarah smiled, understanding that her story represented something unique in military history, the successful integration of shadow operations experience into official military doctrine. She had managed to keep the abilities while changing the context, maintaining her effectiveness while gaining the legitimacy she'd always wanted. "The most important thing I've learned," Sarah said in response to the toast, is that serving your country doesn't require you to sacrifice your principles or operate outside moral boundaries. With the right framework and support, even the most challenging missions can be conducted in ways that honor both military effectiveness and ethical responsibility. As the evening concluded, Sarah looked forward to the next chapter of her career, training a new generation of Marine snipers in techniques that would save lives while serving American interests. She had finally found the perfect balance between her exceptional abilities and her desire to serve honorably in the light rather than the shadows. The young woman who had once been known only as Ghost had become Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Chen, official instructor and developer of the most advanced precision marksmanship program in military history. It was exactly the recognition and purpose she'd been searching for throughout her military career.